Good day. I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is the After the Age of Fire channel. This is episode 35, recorded on March 14th, 2026, on the true price of renewables and nuclear. This is a prepping channel. What are we preparing for? Well, the goal is to help you and your family line to flourish and thrive and reproduce over the next century or two as the world goes through incredibly profound changes. For the last 250 years, we've been multiplying our consumption of everything by two every 22 years. So every generation had twice as much as their parents did. This is averaging across the world's population. But it's been years of extraordinary growth and extraordinary expectations. And this is coming to an end somewhere around now. And it's not just coming to an end, but the current energy consumption that we have is about 46,000 calories per person per day in food, not in food, in fuel, in coal, oil, gas, and in renewables. Most of that is coal, oil, and gas, and only a small amount is from renewables. So that's 46,000 calories from those sources, and another 15,000 in food, fodder, and wood. So altogether, right now the average person worldwide consumes 60,000 calories, and this is going to reduce by around a factor of 2 to somewhere closer to 30,000 calories sometime in the next century or so. So right now, in the next decades, we're coming to the end of the multiplications. We might multiply our energy use and our use of other resources one more time. If we do, those multiplications will be lost, and we'll be back to where we were, actually lower than where we are now, sometime fairly soon, probably within a century, certainly within 2 centuries. The way it'll go is that the first oil and then gas, then coal will hit their peaks and then start to divide, and they'll divide at least twice. So we'll have around, right now we're consuming about 42,000 calories per person worldwide, and that'll be reduced by first a half and then a quarter, roughly every 25 years, roughly. And then we'll just have much less of those, and then we'll figure out how much how much we can get from renewables, and how much we could increase our energy supply from our crops. And we've spent a lot of time in the last 35 episodes analyzing what are the limits for how much energy we could get from different energy sources, from the coal, oil, and gas, from our crops. We just finished a cycle, roughly episodes 21 through 30, about how much energy we can get from our crops and what it would require. And then also we've looked at renewables, how much energy we can get from renewables, and we've argued that, and in fact, we've argued that through 3 times, and right now we're finishing up the last argument about renewables. The limit is somewhere around 15,000 calories per person per day from renewables, and we're just finishing. This is the 4th episode of a 4-episode argument, nailing that down one more time and very strongly. This is the strongest argument. So just to review very briefly how this argument has gone, we talked first about how the biosphere and us are tuned. So that means the biosphere is doing close to the best job of providing for us and for all of its species. And the second thing that it means, what that I mean by tuned, and all of this, if you want to, you can go back to 3 episodes ago and you can see what tuning is. It's really rooted in mathematics and in physics and some of the developments concerning things like chaos and self-organized criticality and complex systems. But anyway, overall, what tuning means, as I've described it, is that the biosphere is near to optimal at doing its job, and 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 that every detail matters. That you change one very small thing, and it can make a huge impact in the entire biosphere, for that matter. We see this. And another example is just the weather, and so there's the famous butterfly effect, where if you cough here, then a month from now, on the other side of the world, a typhoon may change its course. That's the butterfly effect, and it applies equally well to the biosphere. Very small changes make very big changes. Very small things make very big changes. It's very sensitive to every detail. And also, every single thing in the biosphere has multiple roles. So if something isn't growing, it's dying, and then it's feeding other things. Or carbon dioxide, depending on whether it's rock or vapor, or it's part of the or it's been absorbed by the ocean, is doing different things. Um, uh, and it never stops doing something or other. Either it's feeding you in food, or else it's warming the planet if it's in the atmosphere, or else it's regulating the pH of the ocean if it's in the ocean water, and so on. So that's tuning. And then, based on this knowledge that the biosphere is tuned, the next step was that 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 every tuned thing has has vulnerabilities, things that can poison it, so to speak. That very subtle and innocent things can have very large effects. So it's the classic notion of a poison for humans. Something very small can kill you, but also something analogous to that is what you do to the weather if you try to seed it by dropping a few crystals into the dropping something from an airplane into the air and hoping that it will produce rain. You do something very small, and from time to time, not every time, this very small thing that you do to the air results in rain. So you do something small, you get a very large effect. That's the essence of what I call poisoning. Okay, and the fact that the biosphere is tuned means that it can be poisoned by various things. And I'm not really talking about killing the biosphere. I think it's unlikely that we would do that, because in general, for non-living things, and I mean things that haven't reproduced, it's very hard to figure out what particular thing will cause a huge consequence. So a bridge may be vulnerable, but you don't know exactly where to hit this particular bridge to get the whole thing to come crashing down. Or in general, weather on some occasions in some places may be vulnerable to cloud seeding, but in general, you never know whether, when you go cloud seeding, whether you're going to get a rainstorm or not. And almost all of the time you don't. So it's the same thing with the biosphere. It's a very first of all, it's not like we have another. With humans, if a poison kills one human, you can have some confidence that it'll probably kill other humans. But we don't have another biosphere to test on. We don't have any standard poison. Anyway, it just I don't expect us. It's been through this planet has been through huge changes over the last millions and the last couple billion years, and so far we just aren't able to equal that. Even with our strongest technologies, we still can't equal what the biosphere and what the planet have gone through just in the last 100 million years, for instance. So I don't think we're going to kill it, but we can be very concerned about the effects that our actions may have on the biosphere's ability to take care of us. Um, because every one of our actions has very large and unforeseen effects. And generally, because the biosphere is almost optimal at taking care of the species in it and of taking care of us, um, the effects that our changes make on the biosphere almost always cause it to give us a poorer harvest and do a poorer job of taking care of our needs. Um, so, in other words, everything that we do here on this planet has side effects, and consequences, and requires, and the consequences tend to involve us, if we want to cope with them, uh, having to work more and work harder and be more burdened and have and also change, adapt to the world even more. So this is what I mean by poisoning the biosphere, is that innocent things, whatever we do, whether it seems more green or less green, will have consequences, side effects, and those side effects cause burdens that we may find difficult to live with. And when I discussed renewables and the cost of renewables, I mentioned some of those side effects, like not everyone might want to live in a place where they can hear a windmill all night and all day long. Just a small thing, but after a while it might wear on you. And then there are worse things, like maybe you don't want to risk being downwind of a nuclear reactor when it blows up. So all of this argument brings us to the next step, which is that we should pick our poisons carefully. We should pick the consequences carefully. So every energy source has its consequences. Every energy source, no matter how green it seems to be, does poison us. It does affect our lives. It does affect the biosphere. It has consequences that go far beyond what we might think, and and we have to live with those consequences. So, but the key here that I'm trying to drive at is that some energy sources are more poisonous, more burdensome, more difficult to handle the consequences. And so for those energy sources, we should build less. They have a higher cost, not just in terms of dollars, but in terms of all the consequences that we'll have to live with from these energy sources. And therefore, it makes sense to build less of them. Maybe we can still build some, but less. And so what I'm proposing is that there's a way of discerning ahead of time which energy sources are more poisonous or more difficult to live with the consequences, and which ones are less. The ones that are more difficult to live with, we should build less, and the ones that are easier to live with, we should build more. So I gave, this isn't about energy sources, but I gave the example, and the key to knowing which is more poisonous, which is more burdensome, is how close it is to the biosphere's original way of doing things and its original way of providing for our needs. So before we began to really interfere, well, actually, even now, but before we began to interfere, the way that our needs were taken care of here was in a hunter-gatherer role. We would go around finding vegetables, fruits, and hunting animals and eating them, and we also were taken care of by all the materials that were available around us, the wood, the straw, and the dirt, and the rock. Those made our homes and our clothing and everything else we needed. That's where we got our resources. And the way that the biosphere harvests energy, it always stores the energy in carbohydrates and sugar and proteins and oil and fiber. Okay, that's how it works. The further we go away from the biosphere's way of doing things, the larger the consequences will have. So if you do something that is more or less like the way that, for instance, if your way of getting energy is still through carbohydrates, then that's, no matter how you get them, if it's still carbohydrates, that's relatively close to the biosphere's way of doing things, and so you could probably get a lot of energy that way. On the other hand, if your way of getting energy is something completely different, nothing to do with carbohydrates or proteins or oils, then the consequences of using this other way of getting energy will be more severe, and in the end you won't be able to live with as much won't be able to live with the consequences of, if you, well, I like the analogy of, if you have two ways of producing energy and one produces 10 times as much smoke, then maybe you can get 1/10 of the energy from that more smoke producing way means. So if it, you can still get some energy that way, but the consequences are larger, so you probably don't want to burn your materials and get your energy in that, as much in that way. It may have its advantages, but the smoke will limit how much energy you get from it. The same thing that I'm saying about all ways of getting energy. All of them have consequences. Some of them have more severe consequences, and so we need to figure out what the consequences are and which ones have more severe consequences, which ones are more poisonous, and and then based on that decide how much we're going to build. And I think the human race is already in that process, but here I'm summing it up and saying where we're going to get to, how far we're going to get with each one. So we can, and I've been talking about three steps away from the biosphere, the way that we were up until a few thousand years ago, maybe 10,000 years ago, was we were hunter-gatherers, and then our first step away from the biosphere's way of doing things was to set up farms and pastures. And I discussed the consequences in the previous episode. They do have a far-reaching price, but they're relatively close to, I mean, you're still relying on animals and plants. They're relatively close to the hunter-gatherer way of getting energy and resources, so they're rather more livable. And in fact, today we still get around 15,000 calories from our farms and our pastures. Then our second step away, which really began somewhere around 300 years ago, was coal, oil, and gas. And we were using a little bit before then, but that's when we began to really go crazy with it. And in the previous episode, I talked about the consequences of relying on coal, oil, and gas, and they're clearly the consequences. They are far much further away from the biosphere's way of doing things. So they are much more poisonous. They create a lot greater burdens on us, and and currently we are using more coal, oil, and gas than we are using food, fodder, and wood, about 3 times more. But because they are so burdensome, we can expect that sooner or later our willingness to use them will decrease until we'll be using less than we get from our farms and pastures. It's just, if you have a choice about whether you're going to spend your life underground or you're going to spend your life on a pasture, I think most people will live on the pasture or the farm rather than going underground. It's just a different life, and one is clearly more burdensome than the other. And then the last way, after food, fodder, and wood, and coal, oil, and gas, the last step away from the biosphere is a step toward relying on energy that comes in the form of electricity, no longer carbs, no longer chemicals, but delivered to your door by electricity. And we've already been doing, right now about 15,000 calories per person per day are delivered in electricity, and in particular about 4,800 of those calories come from renewables. And unlike coal, oil, and gas, which you could either convert them to electricity or you could do other things with them, like cook your food, the renewables and nuclear deliver only electricity, and then you have to figure out how to harness that electricity. You don't have a choice about them creating electricity for you. That's their main way of delivering energy, their only one. So in this episode, last episode we talked about poisoning, and then about the burdens on the human race that come from farming and pasturing, and then the second step, the burdens that come on the human race from coal, oil, and gas. And then in this episode I'll talk about the burdens on the human race from renewables and nuclear, and I'll be making the point that the burdens are even larger. These ways of getting energy are even more poisonous, even more burdensome. They have larger consequences, more grave side effects, and therefore in the end we're never going to find it in ourselves to sustain as many even as many calories as not even 15,000, because they are so burdensome. So the key point here is that, so I'm just going to list a number of side effects or burdens that come with renewables, ways that they are different from the biosphere and from the natural way that we are provided for by the biosphere. The first thing is that whether you're using renewables or whether you're just simply delivering electricity, once your energy is delivered in electricity, it has nothing to do with the biosphere's normal way of managing energy. The biosphere uses carbon exclusively, carbohydrates, proteins, oils, fiber, and so on. That's how the biosphere manages energy, and we are part of the biosphere. In other words, when you switch to electricity, you're switching to something that's utterly alien to the biosphere and to our own design, the way that the human body and the human race is organized. We don't have a port, a place to plug in an electrical cable. We do have a mouth for eating. So when you switch to electricity, you're switching to something far more different way of managing energy than coal, oil, and gas, and then just going directly to the biosphere. Now, electricity from coal, oil, and gas is kind of a halfway step towards renewables, because if you are using coal, oil, and gas, you do retain some flexibility about it. You have some flexibility. You can stockpile them, for instance, and have them ready when you need them for your generating plant. If you're using renewables, especially solar and wind, you just, if it's not, you can't actually, even nuclear, there's no battery that can last you for more than 12 hours, or last the human race for more than 12 hours. Right now we possess something like 20 minutes of batteries, not 12 hours worth, and we'll never get to 12 hours. So it's complete difference. So there is some flexibility with coal, oil, and gas. So that's why you can switch to, or you can just decide, maybe today I'm not going to generate electricity with this pile of coal. Instead, I'll light a fire. I'll heat my house, or I'll melt some steel. That's flexibility that you don't have with coal, oil, and gas, with renewables. So they're just much heavier burdens. You require massive investments. They're very high tech, and you don't get plastic from renewables. They don't oil at least can be converted to plastics and to all the things that we make out of plastic. The renewables don't do that. So, and then you need wires everywhere if you want to use the renewables. So, for something I want to, so I'm going to go over a list of topics here, and the first one I'm going to talk about is dependence and vulnerability. So, as I discussed at the end of the last episode, coal, oil, and gas make everyone dependent on the people who provide them. Okay. Because only a few people have access to coal, oil, and gas. But that becomes much more extreme when you come to rely on renewables, because as I mentioned, there's only even a few hours of batteries are very expensive, and the only thing you can do if you don't want to rely on batteries is to stockpile coal, oil, gas, and wood. So in nations, if a nation, in fact even today, whole nations are vulnerable to something like a pandemic, a blackout, where the entire electrical grid over or all of a nation just can go out in a second. And therefore, if whoever the supplier is for electricity, if they threaten a nation or a city to take away their electricity, the threatened people have to comply immediately to their demands. So it's like having a gun to your head all the time when you rely on electricity. So like in 2001, California went through rolling blackouts where the electrical companies claimed that they couldn't supply all of California with electricity, so they turned off different parts of California for a few hours at a time, and the prices for a while were 20 times as high as they were normally, and Californians just had to pay. Or more recently in Texas in February 2021, there was a winter storm, and electricity went down, and and while it went down because of the pricing scheme that the companies had planned ahead of time, the price of electricity multiplied by 200. So those people who were still able to get electricity during this cold spell had to pay 200 times more, and often they didn't know it, but that they were paying 200 times more. They got bills later that were staggering, but even if they had known that they were paying 200 times more for the electricity, many of them would have bought it anyway because they needed it to keep their house from freezing and things like that. If you rely on electricity, then you become vulnerable in a way that you don't necessarily have to be vulnerable from other energy sources. You can stockpile them and have them ready. You're dependent. Another topic is that the renewables are big and unmanageable, very, very big scale. So I talked about this a little bit with coal, oil, and gas. They can be big, but less so. So you can mine or pump them with a few, or sometimes with hundreds of people working on it. They aren't particularly high tech. You need some machinery to extract these resources and then to burn them. Okay, but it's not particularly high tech, and the machinery can be made locally in the same country or in the same state. And in fact, they're small enough that a single company could, if it wished, keep all of its operations in-house. A single energy company could. On the other hand, solar and nuclear, there's there's no single company that's responsible for these things. It's too big for a single company to handle, and they're big tech and they're high tech. So for solar, the supply chain for solar panels and the R&D, there's enormous amount of research and development that has happened and continues to go on concerning solar, and these are spread around the world, and you can't somebody who uses solar is depending on a worldwide supply chain. If you're very sensitive to everything that happens around the world when you do that, and just like computer chips are an issue right now, and it requires government support, especially for the R&D. Nuclear also, nuclear is huge. In no country has nuclear gotten anywhere unless it had government sponsorship. Without government sponsorship, nuclear power doesn't get started, and if the government doesn't continue to sponsor, it doesn't continue. And it's clearly too big even for governments. You can see that in the way that the world continues to not have a viable way of disposing of nuclear waste, and also the way that the world continues to seem to not be able to control proliferation of nuclear weapons. Right now we have the war in Iran that is somehow connected to that. So they're both wind and both nuclear and solar are really big tech and high tech and big tech, world spanning stuff, and too hard for anybody to manage, any government to manage. And wind is sort of an intermediate case. It is big tech. You need $3 million to build a modern windmill, and the blades are like 60 meters long. The hub height is 90 meters. So it's not for small organizations. These enormous blades, small organizations are not going to be building their own wind turbines. But it's something you could do in even in a fairly small country, could figure out how to do it. And they are a little high tech, but they're not high tech in the same way as solar and nuclear. One of the things that's particularly high tech is certain wind turbine designs require a special kind of magnet called a neodymium magnet, and that was invented neodymium magnets were invented in 1984, and they're still under thousands of patents, and that's high tech, but you don't have to have a neodymium magnet to have a modern wind turbine, and most don't. And then another thing that's somewhat high tech is their blades. They're made out of composites, which means you have layer upon layer of fiberglass or carbon bonded together with glues, and these are enormous blades too. And it's only in the last. The composites are the use of composites to make large machines is a relatively new thing, the last decades. But it's not particularly, I don't think it's particularly high tech, because it's the ingredients are all things that are familiar, glues and fabrics and so on. So I think wind is a little less, if you're talking about being big and unmanageable, wind is the least so among the renewables. So it's the least poisonous in that sense, so we can live with it better than we can with solar and nuclear. Solar and nuclear, if you want to get in that game, you are immediately dabbling in things that are larger than any government. Not just dabbling, but committing yourself, getting inextricably locked into some machinery that's entirely out of your control. Another topic, there's really no way to set a just price for these, for the renewables. They have uh, the supply chains and the R&D, especially for nuclear and for solar, but to some extent for wind, are complex, and they span the world and require decades of development, and 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 they're really unmanageable. Especially, I think, especially so for solar. There are so many components, so many researchers, so many things that go into building a solar panel and doing the research for the solar panel, that there's really no way to for one person or for any group of people to really exercise oversight over the entire web of suppliers, and to determine, make their own independent determination of what the just price would be for a solar panel. It's something that happens. It happens. The price is determined organically. It's not be. It's by thousands and tens of thousands of suppliers and researchers and governments all interacting in some complex way that's outside of any one person's purview, and they all combine in some you know, some way that defies analysis to come up with the end price of the solar panel. So if you can't analyze all the things that go into a solar panel, or all the pricing, and all the patents and so on, there's really no, it's too complex. There's no moral or pragmatic way of determining a just price for a solar panel. So I think if nobody can look at a solar panel and just and make a thorough analysis and come up with the just price for it, I think that therefore the people who consume solar panels encounter a complete loss of bargaining power. If you can't say what it should cost, if you can't make any argument about what it should cost, then you're in no position to bargain or to argue about how much you should pay for it. Just if somebody demands a price, you have no argument against that price. You could say, okay, well, you're taking advantage of me. You really don't know, and nobody knows. So it's a kind of powerlessness. And I think the same thing goes for nuclear. I think probably we have more ability to assess the fair price of a wind turbine, but nuclear and solar are really beyond the realm of any person or any organization to determine the price. So I'd go further. I'd say that if you choose to depend exclusively on renewables, renewables and nuclear. So if you were to stop using coal, oil, and gas, or food, fodder, and wood as your energy supply, and biofuel, whatever, and if you were to depend instead on renewables and nuclear, then you'd be completely at the mercy of whoever is providing those for you. You'd be in a perpetual state of emergency. It's like somebody holding a gun to your head. I said that a little bit ago, and I think that in the end, if you depend exclusively on these things, then any sort of democracy will be just impossible. So there's I already, in the previous episode, I said we should be concerned about how much we can maintain democracy if we rely on coal, oil, and gas, because that puts all the power in the hands of the few who own it and who have the machinery to extract it. But here we are, the emergency becomes worse, because it's like having an enemy at the gate all the time, at the gate of your city, except for this enemy can penetrate into your city and destroy it in a second. you, the supplier can just turn it off anytime they like. Um, and a real ability to take down a country instantaneously, and no bargaining power. Um, so if any country or any city that depends exclusively on these renewables will will give up its power very quickly to the empire of industry and tech that provides the renewables. Um, you know, if anybody that's powerful enough to bring you down in a second, whenever they like, to do it repeatedly, that person, that organization, that empire has the power. And these renewables, especially the nuclear and the solar, are things that are world-spanning. The organizations that deliver them span the world. They aren't within the control of any country's government, and they certainly aren't in the control of any city or any state. Um, so if a city, a state, or a country decides to rely on these, it's putting itself in the control of something that spans the world, and it's an empire of industry and tech. Um, so if you want to retain democracy, if you want to retain some individual power or some power in the hands of your country's government, you have just three alternatives. Okay, one is perhaps you could try dropping the democracy and just having a very strong leader, and that leader would be your representative to boss around the big tech. That's the way things have often gone when there was an enemy at the gates. When a country was in severe peril, there was some leader who represented them and who organized them and dictated things until they could fight off the threat, if they did manage to fight off the threat. So one option, so perhaps you could rely on renewables if you had a dictator. I don't know. The second one is just, let's not use that energy. Maybe let's not use energy at all, or maybe let's just not use renewables. So if your bargaining power is saying, well, I can take your energy or leave it, then that certainly does give you a certain amount of bargaining power. Or a third one is, and I think this is the most likely one, but I think all three are being pursued in different places around the world right now. Some places are dealing with this difficulty by moving more towards strong leaders. Other places and other people are trying to reduce their reliance on energy, period. And the third option is that you use wind, solar, and nuclear strictly as a supplement. You get most of your energy from other places, and you do build some wind, solar, and nuclear, but only in restricted quantities, and only sort of as gravy on your meal. Another burden that we have from the renewables is that they're fast, and this goes for all of the electricity. Electricity moves at the speed of light, or close to that. The electrical arcs, short circuits, blackouts, and so and nuclear reactors also blow up very quickly, so they require very fast management. And we're not adapted to that time scale. We give very quick reactions on a time scale of seconds or perhaps a half a second, and then planning takes days really, and our communities and families take years to centuries to build, because we're adapted to the biosphere the way it is. The biosphere we didn't really have to deal with things, and nothing on this planet had to deal with things that happened in split seconds or a million times or a billion times a second until now. There was lightning bolts, but those were acts of God. Okay, and because we don't have experience, we're not adapted to dealing with such fast things as electronics. We have no defenses. It's in some sense an invasive species. So you probably have heard that there are a number of very large animals that continue to live in Africa, things like the giraffe, the lion, the rhino, the elephant, and and we grew up alongside those. Our species and the species before us developed alongside these animals, and they generally haven't gone extinct yet. We may drive them extinct any time now, starting perhaps with the rhino, but in other parts of the world where we didn't arrive in other parts of the world until we were maybe 50,000 years ago. We were already acting more or less like ourselves. We arrived in different parts of the world at different times, but more or less starting around 50,000, I think, years ago. And people can go and look at what's in the ground, and they can see that pretty much within hundreds or thousands of years after we arrived in a particular place, the big species living in that place would go extinct. And there's some debate about exactly how they went extinct, whether we hunted them all down or whether we made enough impact on other things that they couldn't live anymore. But it's no question that they went extinct around the time that we arrived in just about everywhere that we went. And so all around the world is a graveyard of hundreds of large animals that no longer live because we're an invasive species. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't exist. I love the human race, but these species didn't live around us as we were growing into what we are now, and they didn't have millions of years to adapt to us the way that the species in Africa did. They just simply, we were outside of their experience, and so when we arrived, they didn't know to defend themselves or to do anything about us. We were just we were in their blind zone, and that's why they went extinct, and the African species didn't. Well, like them, we're in a similar position with electricity. Electricity is something that changes on very, very fast scales, and it's something that we're not prepared to deal with. So, and it has huge effects on us, effects that everyone is living with today. So let's talk about one of the simpler effects, which is video. What video does to us. This is 24 frames per second, and so it's not that much faster than what we can actually react to, like reacting to a ball. It's maybe 5 times too fast. So it's not terribly out of our range, but it is distinctly out of our range. It's far enough out of our range that as soon as you look at a video screen, you begin to hallucinate. Everyone does every time. You see something, and your mind immediately starts acting and feeling as if you were there. Whatever is pictured, you're there. And you may, in fact, usually if there's a person or even a cartoon character there, we begin to feel as if we were the same as that person or cartoon character. We live through their experience, and so we can go through from rage to perfect peace in 2 minutes. So I'm not saying that video is a bad thing. I'm just saying that it has an amazing effect on us. It causes us to hallucinate every time, instantly. And so much so that if I'm exposed to video and something is endangering my life, for instance, if I'm walking through an intersection with moving traffic, I may fail to keep myself safe as I go through that traffic. And it's really we're unable to resist video. You may think that you have a choice about whether to watch video if it's in your presence, but actually we don't. We can't keep our eyes off of a screen if it's within our range of sight. You keep darting your eyes over there to look at it for a millisecond, for a fraction of a second, or often your eyes dwell there for a while and you come back out of your reverie perhaps later. And the reason why we can't resist video is because we're built for the savanna, the African savanna, where we walked on two legs. We were always looking around at what was around us, at the animals, the plants, and the weather, both to defend ourselves but also to find things to eat, places to shelter, and anything that was useful. We were always on the lookout. We were moving ourselves and we were watching everything else that moves. And so to this day we cannot resist looking at anything that moves. And that's why video is irresistible. It looks like it's moving. And so we're hardwired. We just can't keep our eyes off of a screen. And moreover, we've moved ourselves and we've leveled the environment to make fields, and the fields grow very slowly and not much moves across them, and we've built homes for ourselves, and inside the home just about everything is dead and never moves. You might have a piece of furniture in a room that's been there for 30 years, it's just not moving. And for a species that's built to always be on the lookout for moving things, this environment is profoundly unsatisfying. We say we like our homes, but I think the last decades have proved that a lie. We don't like our homes because as soon as we had an opportunity to cover our walls and big screen TVs, we did it. And we leave them on all day and all night, and when we go walking or whatever, we have our eyes glued to our screens. We just can't. If we liked homes, if we liked furniture that never moves, we wouldn't be putting up TVs everywhere and we wouldn't be leaving them on all the time. We don't like those things. They're unsatisfying. They kill the soul. And now that we have an opportunity to do something else, we do. We fill our world with TVs. But so we just can't keep away from the screen. We're built for moving things. And this gives us an imitation, like the difference between a potato chip and a potato, or a piece of hard candy and a steak, It's that kind of difference, and then the video can't fulfill us either, but at least we're defenseless against it. So that's what 24 frames per second can do, but our computers don't do things at 24 cycles per second. They do things at billions of cycles per second. And so we have this ladder of escalation that we've gone through over the last decades of computer games that people can't keep suck up 10 hours at a time on your PC, and then internet, where very fast things are happening around the world to deliver you a certain experience, and then the cell phone and the smartphone. So by now, even when families are together, you might have each member of the family sitting there and each gazing at their cell phone throughout dinner and the rest of the day. Same thing with friends meet, where the cell phones have taken over our lives and our friendships and substituted them with something else, something inferior. And by now we have not just the internet, but we have AI and data management behind the internet that It knows everything about you, what you've been watching, where you've been shopping. It's even listening to us now. And it's engineered to keep you coming back. So video itself is irresistible, and these things just take it up. Just multiply it again and again and again. We're just defenseless against this. Okay, and the reason is that this technology is too fast for us, and we just, it's outside of what we were bred for. So, it's one thing to have a rider on a horse and the rider able to control their horse, and that's a great thing for the rider and perhaps also for the horse. It's another thing if the horse is careening out of control and taking you wherever it wants. And in that case, the likelihood is you'll break your neck, and it's probably time to jump off the horse. I think we're in that position with electronics, where they're very useful. I'm using them right now to record this video and distribute it, but it has to be kept under control, and we're not doing it right now. We're just letting it take us where it wants. So when technology molds and controls us instead of the reverse, it becomes an addiction, and we are addicted, and we're defenseless. And this defenselessness will be that much, if we rely on renewables, which are all about electricity, we'll have no sales resistance to this at all. We'll have no control. If we make sure to keep renewables as a supplement and to use other forms of energy, food, fodder, and wood, coal, oil, and gas, as our primary sources of energy, then that gives us some liberty to turn off the electrical grid when we want, or to use it selectively as we wish. But if you're getting all your energy as electricity from some renewable supplier, and they tell you that since they're being so good as to supply you with energy, therefore you must have an energy saving device in your TV and in your refrigerator and in your stove that talks to them all the time and records what you're doing and what you're saying, all for your own good. Well, you aren't going to be able to say no to that. Renewables in general just are not green. Green energy is not green. They replace the biosphere, they eliminate it. So solar panels, they just cover over the green stuff and they replace it. Wind, if we adopted wind, enough wind to supply all our energy, the whole world would be turned, well, excepting around the tropics where there's not much wind, but the rest of the world would be covered, it would be turned into a factory floor. Or if we went for nuclear energy as our energy source, then we'd have 4 or 5 meltdowns a year, to provide as much energy as we use now, and most of those would have large fallout plumes like Chernobyl and Fukushima did. 4 out of 5 meltdowns so far produced large fallout plumes. The exception was 3 Mile Island. And then there's I could get into this and just take some time for this, but I'm not. I want to be brief about this point. Is that when you use electricity and renewables, you have to mine and release into the environment elements that are poisonous. Like some of them are cadmium, uranium, nickel, zinc, and copper. You might not think of copper as poisonous, And the problem with elements is that they don't go away. It's unlike any other substance that eventually will rot or degrade, and within even plastics degrade over centuries. Most everything else degrades over days to years, but elements never go away. So you release some into your yard today, and then you release some again next year, and then again the next year, and the amount will just build up and build up and build up. So and copper, for instance, you might think of it as an innocent material, but it's actually not. None of these metals and things are innocent. So we use it as a pesticide in farms because it can kill pests. We use it to kill algae in lakes, copper, the same stuff that we cook with. We use it as paints on boats because it can halt or slow down the growth of things on the surface of the boat, and it can kill mollusks and fish and things. Okay, now we have an advantage with copper that allows us to withstand much larger amounts of copper than other species. We have a special gene that produces a protein, and this protein is able to remove copper from our bodies. And because of that, we can, say, poison a field so it kills the pests without poisoning ourselves, because we have this special gene, this special protein that gets rid of copper. But there are around 250,000 humans who are missing that gene and missing that protein, and so they get sick from levels of copper that don't affect the rest of us humans. And it's just a special case. We don't have similar genes for other elements. Just for copper we have a special advantage. But even for us, if you feed yourself enough copper, it will hurt you. It's just that you need to feed yourself a lot more copper than you would need to feed a pest in your field or a fish in your lake. I'm not sure if I said less or more. The fish and the pests are much more sensitive than we are. But you keep on piling on the copper in your lake, and it will get progressively. You keep trying to control the algae, and the lake will get progressively more poisoned, and more species will be affected, and sooner or later you'll be affected too. And that's for copper. Now there are lots of others, like zinc and nickel and so on in our alkali. The most innocent kind of battery is the alkaline battery. And even those have elements in them that are toxic in the right quantity. And then other batteries, like rechargeable batteries, are far more toxic. And then, but and they're not something that you should, if we wanted to control the poisoning that builds up year after year as we continue to use batteries, we would make sure that every battery was watched and tracked and returned to its maker. But in fact, our batteries go in pieces of electronics that once they stop working, we don't care about them anymore, and so we just throw them out. And the batteries, the materials in most of our batteries are just eventually make their way into landfills or directly into the environment, and the poison is building up. Even with things that you think we might really pay attention to, batteries are a dime a dozen maybe, but we also use radioactive materials for many different, like there are millions of them just in the US alone for processing food, sterilizing it, for also sterilizing medical equipment, or measuring different things, and for medicine, or for checking welds on pipes and stuff like that. We have millions of radioactive sources around the world, and we regularly lose them. So these are some of the main disadvantages, main burdens of using renewables and of using electricity. And you just you know, I think if you've listened to the previous episode, or if you just think a little bit, you'll realize that these burdens are much larger than the ones that come with coal, even oil and gas, and those are still larger than the ones that come from farming and pasturing. So let me conclude. So in contrast to farming and fossil fuels, renewables and nuclear are an alternative to the biosphere. Farming and fossil fuels are still carbon-based. They still use materials that are accessible, actually came from the biosphere, and that once we use them, they are returned to the biosphere, and the biosphere has a use for them. The renewables and nuclear are not like that. Okay, and they therefore, because they're an alternative to the biosphere, they require far more from us and from the environment, and they have far more poisonous effects. They're far more burdensome. The side effects are enormous. So right now we're not exclusively dependent on the renewables. We're consuming about 46,000 calories plus the food, fodder, and wood. Of those 46,000 calories, only about a third is delivered in electricity. So we're not depending exclusively on electricity. We are depending on it a lot, but not exclusively. And out of those 15,000 calories or so, only about 4,800 come from the renewables and nuclear. So since we haven't gone we haven't jumped in completely into this energy source, we haven't seen all the poisons active yet. So there may be ones that I haven't mentioned, okay, or some of the ones that I have mentioned may not have started really seeming to be a problem yet. And the ones that we do see, the poisons that we do see in action, are not fully manifested yet. So you may think that already the world's having a problem with children watching cell phones too much, but just wait until the day when we rely only on renewables and see what things are like then. I can guarantee you that world will be unimaginably different and unimaginably more problematic than where we are now. So some of the poisoning that we do see, just a few of them, and we can go on, even though we're not fully invested in these options yet, there's the nuclear pollution. We have 5 meltdowns and other kinds of nuclear pollution. We have the cropland being converted into deserts by solar panels. We're moving towards being ruled by electricity providers and by the global organizations behind them. And I think part of that is I think people are very aware of the internet providers and companies like Google and all the big data companies. I think those are part of the electricity. They go hand in hand with the electricity providers, and power is moving into their hands, into the hands of big tech and big industry, and they're keeping track on each one of us. It's gotten to the point where they're spying on everyone. Now, actually, I bet most of our voice conversations are being parsed by AI, and some database somewhere is keeping a record of most of the world's conversations. And another side effect, and another problem, is that there's this universal addiction to cell phones and social media. So these rather severe effects are a direct consequence of the fact that electricity and the renewables are so far from the biosphere. So if you sidestep one poison, like if you manage to, suppose you just decide to close all your nuclear reactors, and so you won't have any nuclear meltdowns, well, another poison will get you. As long as you're consuming this sort of energy, some poison will get you. So the only solution, I think, is to use renewables very carefully and watchfully, and only as a supplement. Now, it looks to me like the human race is already strongly resisting renewables, and also to some extent resisting electricity. With renewables, you can see it from the fact that despite enormous pressure worldwide for decades now and lots of propaganda, we're still using only 4,800 calories of renewables per person per day, which is a tenth of the coal, oil, and gas that we use. Maybe an eighth. Okay. And also in previous episodes, I looked at the cost of the financial cost, the price in dollars of these sources of energy, and the dollar cost of wind, solar, and nuclear, of all of them, is such that, well, for wind and solar, we'll never build more than 15,000 calories, even if we spend as much as we do on a car as we do on cars each year. We just can't afford the cost, and the reason why we can't afford the cost is because the human race is already sensing through its experience and its work. It's already sensing that there's some burden that comes with these energy sources, just the burden of constructing them, keeping them maintained, and all the problems that come with them, managing those problems. And that burden is large enough, it's already getting priced in to the included in the price of these energy sources, and that's why the energy sources have prices as high as they are. We see it especially with nuclear, where we became so concerned about nuclear safety that the price is just in fact the price of nuclear is much worse than that, much higher than that of wind and solar, because we sensed starting 50 years ago that nuclear was especially burdensome, and I think we're already starting to have some sense about wind and solar. Of course, the real price of wind and solar and nuclear is a lot higher than the one we've priced in. If we knew all the consequences and priced them all in, we'd come to much larger numbers. And so I've finished discussing the pricing scheme, which energy source is more poisonous and which is less poisonous, and so on. And based on that, we can arrive at some conclusions at how much we're going to be able to get from each energy source long term. So the baseline is food, fodder, and wood. We've been through that in depth. Right now we get 15,000 calories. This is and I argued that we might be able to get up to 30,000 if we work really hard on it for the next century or two. 30,000 calories per person per day. So I'm not quite sure where the limit is, but it's somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000. So the next more poisonous is coal, oil, and gas. They're more burdensome, and right now we're using 46,000 calories, 47,000 calories from these sources. But I don't think we've paid attention to the cost, to all aspects of the cost. In fact, our use of so much energy has had huge effects on us individually and as societies. I think many of our families and many of us individually would seem alien and unrecognizable to our ancestors. Not because I think our ancestors could adjust fairly quickly to being able to fly through the sky or whatever, or being able to, or having a horse that It runs 3 times. It runs at 50 miles an hour. I mean, they can get that through their heads, and after a year, learn to drive that car. But the human character and our has suffered, and our families have suffered. So by now, our families are just dissolving. And so I think that there are certain consequences of using so much energy and from coal, oil, and gas, and then those consequences will grow. I mean, the difficulties coming with coal, oil, and gas will grow in the next century, next 50 years, and once we start realizing that if we want to continue this energy consumption, we'll have to send armies underground, or start living with acid rain again. I think we'll find that it's not convenient to continue consuming so much coal, oil, and gas. And since they are more burdensome than living on a farm or running a pasture, I think in the end we'll be using less coal, oil, and gas than food, fodder, and wood. So how much is less? Well, if we get up to 30,000 calories of food, fodder, and wood, then maybe we could keep getting 10,000 from coal, oil, and gas, but definitely less. Okay. And then, so I already told you that I expect that we'll have our energy supply from those sources, and we'll have it again. So in the end, it'll be a quarter or less what it is now. And there are good reasons for that. It's just because once it becomes difficult to get the coal out of the ground, when we have to work for these things, we'll find that we'd rather spend our hours toiling on a field. Most of us. We'll still want some, but not. We'll decide we don't have to have as much as we need now. And the most burdensome, the most poisonous energy source are the renewables and nuclear. And all I can say about those is we'll decide that they're burdensome enough, difficult enough, the consequences are grave enough that we'd rather not get as much energy from them as we do from coal, oil, and gas. So if our energy supply of coal, oil, and gas ends up being 10,000 calories per person per day, then maybe we'll decide to build 5,000 calories per person per day of renewables and nuclear. So it's a hierarchy. We'll get the most energy from our fields and our forests, and we'll get the next we'll get a bit less energy from mining, coal, oil, and gas, and we'll get even less energy from the renewables and nuclear. In other words, the renewables, nuclear, coal, oil, and gas will be supplements. Right now, for a temporary period, the food, fodder, and wood are supplementary, and the main energy source is coal, oil, and gas. That will go back to how it was traditionally. It'll go back to most of our energy coming from our fields and forests, and everything else being supplemental. So that's where we're going, and therefore, if our supply of food, fodder, and wood is 15,000 to 30,000 calories, and everything else is supplemental, you can be sure that our total energy supply is not going to be 60,000. It's going to be less, and I think 30,000 is probably about where it's going to be. Why do I think 30,000? Well, you know, in previous episodes, I talked about the dollar price of the renewables, and especially of wind and solar. The dollar price of wind and solar comes out so that we could, if we spent all our effort, we've spent huge amounts of effort on just all of our, in fact, free money on building those energy sources, would get 15,000 calories. So 15,000 plus the 15,000 that we get today from food, fodder, and wood, that makes 30,000. Okay, and then I think, okay, well, there are trade-offs between building renewables and building other things. Okay, in fact, we wouldn't spend that amount of money on the renewables. We would take a lot of our effort and spend it on sending people underground to get more coal, and we'd also sending people onto the farms to get more energy out of our farms. So I think the maximum, if we just didn't invest in more farms or in better farms, and if we didn't invest in more coal, if we just invested in renewables, we could possibly maybe get 15,000 that way. But so I think that's just a measure of the. I'm not sure that we'd even get 15,000. Might be 10,000, but there's a kind of then if we want instead to get our energy from other sources, we'll have to make trade-offs, and we'll have that will mean less of the renewables and more of the other things. But at any rate, there will be an expense for the energy, and so I think that's why I think 30,000. I think it could be just renewables plus food, fodder, and wood. That's 30,000, but probably we're going to not allocate our resources that way. We'll spend our resources in other ways, but still we'll get. So we'll sacrifice the renewables, and we'll have more of the other things, and we'll be poisoned less, therefore. But still 30,000. So these are all rough arguments, but I think by now the burden. I think they're very strong arguments that we're going to have less energy than we do now, and the bulk of it will come from food, fodder, and wood. So back to your farms, guys, and then next coal, oil, and gas, and next renewables and nuclear. So with that, I'll end the episode, and if you know anybody who's interested in this, who would be interested in this, please invite them to watch, and do keep coming back. Okay, have a good week and keep coming back.